Good morning, and welcome to latest episode of the 1 to 10 podcast with 110 Associates. Delighted to introduce today's guest, Mr. Paul Frost, who is currently serving as CFO at Puma Investments. Good morning, Paul. You okay?
Hi, Khuram. Yeah, well, thank you.
Good. So, Paul, thank you for making the time and joining us today. I guess we just jump straight into it, and if we have time at the end, we can talk about cricket and all the other fine things that we enjoy. But
really make life worth living.
So I guess let's talk about your journey today. How did you get to this point of being a CFO, and was it something that you'd always had in mind as what you wanted to achieve?
Sure. No, it wasn't. It's not something that I sort of set myself a career goal 20 years ago to get to this stage, and have been on a steady path since. I trained as an accountant in practice back in the early 2000s. Graduated from university with a history degree, right. And was unsure really in terms of sort of future career path at that stage, but decided to take the accounting qualification effectively to buy a bit of time, get a recognised qualification that could open doors and give options. I trained at one of the mid-tier firms at BDO, which was a sort of conscious decision to not go to the big four and to get a little bit more of that. I think sort of hands-on, tangible experience, working with smaller businesses, a lot of owner-managed businesses back then. I qualified. I stayed on for 5 years post-qualification at BDO. Again, sort of conscious decision, not just to jump out into industry immediately on qualifying, but to build up a bit of a portfolio at a more senior level. Mm-hmm. Then moved out into industry in 2008, into a real estate company. Interesting timing in 2008 as the world was starting to fall apart. But my background for the previous 3 or 4 years had been in real estate, right. And it was a sector I was interested in, and a sector I think lends itself quite well to a financial background. Mm-hmm. It's also a lot of its yields and returns. It's understandable. It's also quite tangible. Everybody either owns a house or rents a house. And if you can get your head around the economics of that, you can get your head around the economics of real estate. Mm-hmm. And my career has been in the real estate or financial services industries, focused on real estate ever since. I joined initially as a finance business partner, worked for 4 years at that initial company, during which time I was promoted to financial controller, looking after the UK business. This was a European-wide business supporting the European MD. Very much a business partnering role, as opposed to a sort of a group central, more financial reporting role. From there, I moved to get a promotion into an FD role at a FTSE 100 company. The place I'd been at previously was a FTSE 250. That company, I won't name them, but the culture was not all I'd hoped it would be. I think it's fair to say. And personally, I got quite frustrated in the FTSE 100 environment, where it was very slow decision making, very difficult to get things done. I think multiple committees to get things approved and so on. So in 2014, I made the move to Puma Investments, which is a much smaller organization. We've built it up over the 6 years I've been there. We now have about 70 people in the business. When I first joined, it was a dozen or so. Right. Very, very different experience. And as CFO there, I have the ability to sort of touch every part of the business, get involved in everything. it's a benefit of the role, but I guess also a benefit of the scale of the organisation.
Yep. Perfect. And in terms of, I guess, when you first joined Puma in that CFO seat, what were, and I appreciate the challenges today are different to what they were then, but what were your biggest challenges when you first stepped into a CFO role?
Principally establishing a proper finance function and finance infrastructure. When I came into the business, the finance team was two people who were, to all intents and purposes, bookkeepers. Really, they were keeping score, but not doing any more than that. And the business needed a proper function establishing. It needed decent MI being delivered to the leaders of the business. Leaders of the business didn't really know what the P&L of their business was, and they didn't know what was driving the revenues, what was impacting their profit. They just didn't have the visibility of that. So establishing that, identifying really what the KPIs of the business, what are the half a dozen things that we need to be measuring, and if they're moving in the right direction, the business is moving in the right direction. So the first 2 to 3 years really were spent building the team, recruiting a new team. The two people who were there when I joined both left the business voluntarily, but they left the business, and I hired a new team from scratch. We upgraded the accounting software that we were using, and slowly but surely we established some proper management information, some regularly producible, recurable information, and that started to educate the senior management, the CEO and the divisional heads around what the finance function could do. To that point, they'd never really seen the value in a finance function, I think. And so, establishing that and positioning the finance team as genuine business partners who could help with strategy, who could identify issues, could really help the business to grow. That was the main challenge, and that took a reasonable amount of time to get to that position.
Yeah. Do you feel like you've come from that business partnering world, as opposed, you made the point earlier, it wasn't necessarily just a group finance reporting function that you were in previously. So I get the impression that's really shaped your view on the value that a finance function can bring, and that it's not just about controls and reporting, but it's about actually demonstrating. Very much so.
Very much so. I think that's a fair observation. That there is there's clearly a role and a place for all of these different functions, depending at the organisation you're at. The large listed organisations need a substantial central function. Their financial reporting obligations are considerable, and it's an essential thing that finance needs to bring. But for me, the interest is much more around partnering with the business. And really getting involved in all of the strategic and operational sides of things. I think you're right, that probably was shaped from my initial experiences, but also just where I'm most drawn personally.
Yep, great. So I guess in terms of, let's fast forward to the current day then, and obviously you're now, as you mentioned, you're now dealing with a very different beast, shall we say, to what it was when you first joined. But what do you feel are the top 3 skills or challenges that you face in your role today?
So I think probably the biggest one is trying to get the balance right between needing to still be close to the numbers, to still have that control function, because that does still sit with me and with my team. Getting the balance between that and being able to find sufficient time and headspace and positioning yourself, I guess, in the business to really drive the sort of strategic longer term initiatives that will help help the business grow. A CFO quite rightly will look to their, sorry, a CEO will look quite rightly to their CFO to be all over the numbers and the detail, and to understand that, to be comfortable the controls are in place. They're right to do that. Really, to be able to do that, you need to establish a good solid team who you can rely on. There's the phrase, a lot of people use it. You can delegate the task, you can't delegate the responsibility. I think that holds true in this area. So I've been able to sort of establish a team that I can rely on to produce the numbers, to maintain the controls, and to deliver information in a way to me that gets me close enough to the detail that I need to be without being mired in it 24/7.
Yeah.
Getting that balance right is a sort of a constant challenge. There's a constant sort of push and pull factors. That I'd say that's the main one. There are still, and I think there always will be, people in business who do still look at finance as the scorekeepers, and sometimes you've got to push quite hard to get through that door and get a seat at the table there. I haven't found that particularly at Puma. Probably my nature, I push quite hard anyway, but I know in previous roles and talking to peers, that remains, I think, a challenge for finance leaders.
Yep. I guess part of that is probably also your ability to manage and navigate the relationship, not just with your CEO, but also with the team under you. Yeah,
but very much so. Look, ultimately, success in most roles is about the relationships you establish and you maintain. Finance is in an unique position, I think, to in the sense that it touches all parts of the business. It certainly has the right to inquire and go into all parts of the business. That's part of its remit. So consequently, yes, you need to establish good relationships across the board, really. As a CFO, clearly the CEO relationship is a fundamental one. If that isn't good, it's going to be difficult to succeed in the role. But it's broader than that. Really, you need to establish good relationships with all of the key stakeholders, across the business. Yeah. As well as, of course, being able to rely on the team, as I've said.
Yeah. Cool. So let's talk about just yourself then. Now, what do you enjoy most about your role?
Being able to get involved in everything across the business, really. Yeah. And particularly, I think in this role, it's been very, very satisfying to see how the business has gone from, as I said, 12 people or so when I first joined to now 70. There's clear path to further growth. It's exciting to be part of that, and to have that seat at the main table to be able to influence the direction of travel.
No. Great. Fine. So I guess now forgive obviously that this is the self-serving element of our channel, because we're going to talk about your views on recruitment. So are there certain traits or characteristics that you look for when you're hiring candidates?
Yeah, look, you don't need to apologize for it. It's fundamental. I mean, as I've sort of said, that was the sort of defining aspect of my first 2 or 3 years, in this role was recruiting the right people.
Yeah.
Look, it's clearly it depends a bit on the sort of on the roles that you're looking for. Are they particularly technical? Are they more business partnering? That sort of thing. But in terms of, I think, general trends that hold true across all hires, I would say. The first one I look for is a genuine interest in what the business is doing. We're in an unusual unusually sort of favourable position in finance, particularly if you've got a qualification behind you, that the skills are very transferable. You can work in pretty much any industry around, and you can transition between the two. But the people who I think really succeed are the people who genuinely enjoy and are genuinely interested in the business and the industry that they find themselves. So I always try and probe that a little bit through the recruitment process. Just ask people sort of generally what do they think about whatever the trends may be in the real estate market, the financial services market. I don't expect them to be specialists, but if you've got an interest, you can tell, I guess, fairly early on if people are interested in the sector in which they're looking to work. That would be one key one. I think another key one, particularly obviously for the business partnering type finance function that I've talked about, is an ability to sort of converse with non-financial people in a sensible, meaningful way that they will understand. And again, you can tell that reasonably easily, I think. To get people to explain sort of broad concepts and so on. I tend to interview alongside non-financial individuals as well, and try and encourage them always to ask the financial questions and see how the answers are explained, because that's a key success factor, really. If you're just delivering too much jargon, you'll lose the audience, and you'll revert back to that view of finance as these sort of boffins who keep scoring the corner, but we don't really understand what they do. So those are two traits that I think hold true across sort of all roles and levels of recruitment within finance, I've found.
It's interesting that you've mentioned a couple of times about skills being transferable, because it's certainly not a sentiment that we see with all our clients. Sometimes clients can be very focused on sector experience and background. So I guess reassuring and refreshing for candidates listening out there to hear that.
Look, my first, the role I took at Puma Investments, my first CFO role, was a change of sector. It was financial services. Having previously worked in real estate companies, now there's a degree of overlap. A number of the strategies that we pursue at Puma are real estate focused, but fundamentally it's a different business. It's a fund management business. It's financial services. It's FCA regulated. That was completely new to me as well. I had to learn that from the ground up. So for me, I think you can teach people knowledge, and you can teach people skills. It's much more difficult to teach people character. It's very difficult to sort of teach someone or compel someone to be interested in something they're not innately interested in. And it is difficult, it's not impossible, but it is difficult to teach a sort of natural empathy and communication style that will work in a finance function. So that's what I look for. I look for the sort of the innate stuff, because we can train the rest.
No, agreed. I always say it's, you can't teach things like attitude, right? And when a candidate has that spot on, you can almost forgive some of the technical shortcomings that can be. I mean,
we also use psychometrics a lot during our assessment process. Something that I've always been interested in, and I think it's very valuable. Our HR director is very passionate about it, and so every hire from the most junior hire to the most senior hire, we get a psychometric assessment done. They're uncannily accurate, and whilst I wouldn't say we use them as a selection, as sort of the selection process, we use them to inform the sort of questions and areas that we will probe in the latter stages of the recruitment process. Because everybody's character is different. Nobody is going to tick every single box. You can't be phenomenally big picture and also all over the detail all of the time. for example. But it informs, the areas that you want to look at and probe through that process. So yeah, it is very much about sort of character and attitude, I think.
Brilliant. So let's move on to, I guess, and I know this is something that you're probably quite well versed in personally, but I guess if you look behind you, there's a shall we say a generation of controller level candidates who some may be sat there quite frustrated in their current seats and thinking that they're ready to step into a CFO or finance director type role, and similarly there are others that are coming up to that controller level and trying to navigate their career further down the line. As someone who's gone through that journey yourself, what advice would you give to those characters that are kind of, I guess, coming up the ranks and seeking to ultimately end up in that number one seat?
Yeah, I think probably the first one would be back yourself, be confident, and if you want something, ask for it, because senior leaders aren't mind readers. They don't know. You may have burning ambition, but if you don't tell someone, they won't know. I think I don't know if this may be controversial or not, but reading quite a lot at the moment about the diversity issue, and particularly the relative lack of women in senior roles. One of the things that studies report again and again and again is that women tend to be more reluctant to go for jobs where they don't necessarily tick all of the boxes, whereas men are typically, it's stereotypical, but the studies do seem to show it, men are more willing to take a risk and go for a job where they only tick some of the boxes. And the reality is it's very rare that you will tick all of the boxes for a promotion, for a next level up. But you need to give confidence to those who are in a position to offer you that job, that you can learn the bits that you don't know yet, and you can grow into that role. And if you don't have that confidence in yourself, it's very, very difficult to project that confidence onto somebody else. So that would be, sort of one thing I would say. I've gone for promotions and pushed myself into positions, and when I haven't ticked all the boxes. Confident, slightly scared, but confident that I've got enough about me to sort of work it out as I get into the role.
Yeah,
I think that's one thing. The other thing I think I would say, obviously it depends on whether the individual is looking for the promotion within their own organisation or within another organisation. But really, it is about establishing relationships and establishing the sort of emotional intelligence, I guess, to be able to converse at a senior level and be confident and hold your own, at the board table, and be sure that you have something to bring, and you can offer something that others. You'd be amazed how can I put this? How little non-financial people know about finance, and in a lot of cases, how it scares them. I've worked for a couple of MDs who were not at all sort of financially attuned, if you like, or maybe that's the wrong word, but they would struggle to read a set of management accounts, and being able to sort of support them through that was important. So sometimes we think what we do is sort of less important, or it's easy, it's just numbers. It's not. It's phenomenally important, and it's actually, there's a reason it's taken a few years to get qualified and to establish in the market, establish where you are in your career. Be confident about that, and be confident what you can bring to the table.
Yeah, no, thank you, that's very useful. It's interesting about the point you made earlier around the genders, because I also read this article about how male and female candidates differ in their interpretation of a job spec, which is what you touched upon. So a male candidate is more likely to look at the list of tasks, and even where it's something that they've not done before, they kind of just skim over it and convince themselves that they've either done it or can do it. Whereas female candidates would look at that list and, almost kind of, if there were 5 points and 3 of them were things that they've not done before, it would almost put them off from applying.
Yeah, I think that's very much the case. I think also historically job specs have often tended to be written in a way, using terms and language that tend to appeal more to male and female candidates. Lots of things about challenge and competition and these sorts of things. Again, it's stereotyping a little bit to say that appeals to men, it doesn't appeal to women. Of course, there's nuances within that, but again, studies would sort of point to the fact that there is a gender bias that's historically been in that, probably because a lot of people writing the job specs are men.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's an interesting topic actually, and I guess for us, part of our plans for this podcast to kind of maybe embrace, have a series talking about diversity. So maybe we can revisit with you at some point on some of these issues.
Yeah, sure. It's something that we're really actually we're investing a lot of time and and money in at Puma. We're taking it very seriously. We've engaged sort of globally recognized consultancy to sort of take our approach to the to the next level. We're going to be working with them over the next year or so. So yeah, it's increasingly important part of the agenda, I think.
No, absolutely. Great. So let's focus now back on Paul. How do you, I guess, keep on top of your, not just your role, but your space, like your market and so on? Are there any tools or nuggets of wisdom that you rely on for your own development?
For me, it's really around the staying on top of the sector and the industry that you're in. As I say, to really add value at the senior level, you've got to be able to talk the language that the team on the front line are talking. So for me, I don't subscribe to thousands of podcasts or read vast amounts of articles or TED Talks or those sorts of things. Look at them when they're referred to, but I subscribe to half a dozen or so industry either publications or websites and so on. I get daily news feeds of sort of key developments in the industry. I find that very important, just to sort of stay on top of trends, and over time, you almost by osmosis, it sort of you start to see the same stories of the same themes coming up. You can see where your industry, where your sector is leaning or is moving away from over time. Beyond that, I sort of stay on top of the financial papers, and that's about it, really.
Yep. Perfect. So let's now move to the final part of our conversation today, Paul. I guess it's let's look forward, which is something that you've always, I guess, done well, shall we say? But in terms of the next for yourself or your team within the wider organization, what do you think are either the challenges that you'll face over the next 12 to 24 months as we come out of this pandemic situation, or what do you feel will be the key skill sets that will allow you all to come out of this successfully? Yeah.
There's a few different aspects to that, I guess. I think in terms of skill sets, increasingly we're looking to introduce further technology and automation into what we do. I don't think we're alone in that. An awful lot of finance functions are still relatively manual in what they do. They don't have an accounting system, but there's lots of Excel spreadsheets and these sorts of things. And there are now a vast number of tools out there that can make life more efficient. Identifying what they are and implementing them in a useful way that's the challenge, really. Yep. And I think in smaller organizations such as ourselves, one of the skill sets that's often missing is sort of project change management skill set. It's interesting. My wife works for a large insurance company. She's in the change management team. We've got dozens of them in that team because the business employs tens of thousands of people. We don't, and a lot of smaller organizations, when they're implementing new systems, people are trying to project manage it alongside their day job, and that almost invariably fails or results in implementation of a system that achieves half of what it could have done. So it's something that we're actively looking at the moment to bring that skill set into the business, not specifically within finance, but just generally within the business. But I think we'll invariably work closely with finance to help us sort of take that automation, that technology to the next stage. So I sort of make that point. I think is a sort of general challenge across the business. We are continue to be in a fairly high growth pattern, which is obviously excellent. It means that everybody is pretty busy. Work is quite intense. So support and over the last year or so, that's obviously come with a myriad of other challenges as well. So supporting the team, making sure that they've got the necessary resource, sort of the headspace, that they know they've got my support and the support of the wider business to do their job, and that they can shout if it's all getting a bit too much, or it's they feel that they're drowning. They have built the team from 2 to 7 over the time as we've gone up, and I would expect that will grow further over the coming years. You'll be delighted to hear. So yeah, as we grow and we bring hopefully new funding lines in, launch new products and so on, that will provide challenges, but also some really good opportunities for the team if they want to sort of broaden their area. For myself personally, the next few years I think will be will hopefully be spent helping Puma along that growth path. The probably more sort of medium longer term, the question that I sort of wrestle with from time to time, and I'm not as you'll have gathered, I'm not a sort of long-term planner who says in 5 years I will need to be here, in 10 years here, and so on. I don't think the world works like that. You need to be more opportunistic. But I guess the question that is in the back of my mind is whether my career should continue down the CFO path, or increasingly over the last probably 10, 15 years, CFOs are transitioning into CEO roles. As I've said, I think you're in a unique position as a CFO. You see all the business, you obviously understand the finances, the profit drivers, what delivers shareholder return. You're well positioned in a lot of senses to move into the CEO role. But equally, there are a lot of areas that I wouldn't have experience of in a CEO role. I've never worked in sales departments. I've limited experience of marketing, others and so on as well. So almost goes back to that previous point. How brave do you feel?
Are you backing yourself to achieve that point? Yeah.
But for me, I think there will come a time where I want to do that. Quite passionate about sort of particular values that I'd like to see in a company that I was running, I guess, or was leading. I think we're in an interesting time as we come out of the pandemic. A lot of people are sort of soul searching a bit and looking, what is the role of business? What responsibility do companies have? It's no longer the Milton Friedman, it's all about delivering shareholder value. It's now, there's a much wider agenda than that. And I find that interesting. I want to be involved in that, and the best place to be involved in that is from the top.
Yep. No, absolutely. Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, I've certainly had a lot. I think there is a lot of reflection taking place at the moment, and yeah, I think to your point, you're absolutely right. I think for us, we've certainly seen, or I've personally seen, even not necessarily through recruitment, but just the world generally, lots of CEOs now coming from either accounting or legal backgrounds because they have that kind of foundation, I'd say, of knowledge of what goes on behind the scenes with the business rather than just at the front end. So
yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the qualification, I think, I think back, it was a while ago, but the qualification back then, I was ACA, but there are others that they don't just teach you double entry bookkeeping and the basic accounting. They teach you, the basics of business. They are in a way a sort of early stage MBA.
Yeah.
And I think that you then see that coming through. So successful finance leaders are often grounded in more than just finance, and therefore are able to take that step perhaps more easily than others.
Brilliant. Well, Paul, thank you so much. It's been really interesting hearing your perspectives and about your story. And yeah, I look forward to seeing this getting finalized so we can get it out there and people can share your story with you. But thank you again for your time.
No problem at all.
All right, I'll catch you really soon.
Thanks.
Take care.